History said the Taíno were gone, extinct, erased within a generation of Columbus landing on their shores. That was the official version, written into textbooks, repeated in classrooms, treated as settled fact for 5 centuries. A people met, overwhelmed, and obliterated. Case closed. The problem is that ancient DNA does not agree. Modern genetics has done to Caribbean history what it keeps doing to every story humanity told itself before the biology arrived to complicate it. It found something the written record buried. Not a trace, not a faint signal at the margins. A living, measurable genetic inheritance running through millions of people in the Caribbean today, concentrated most heavily in Puerto Rico, carried in the bodies of people who never knew what they were carrying. The Taíno greeted Columbus in 1492. They were the first indigenous people of the Americas to encounter the full force of European colonization. What followed was documented in detail, much of it by the colonizers themselves, and the documentation is devastating. Disease, forced labor, massacre. Cultural dismantling so thorough that within decades the Spanish were writing the Taíno off as functionally non-existent. But the genetics tell a different story. And the genetics, unlike the Spanish colonial record, had no political reason to lie. Before there was a Caribbean in any European sense of the word, before any map carried those island names, before any ship crossed the Atlantic looking for a route to somewhere else entirely, the Taíno were already there. They had been there for a long time. They occupied the Greater Antilles, the large island arc curving through the northern Caribbean, Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and spreading outward into the Bahamas, a civilization that by the late 15th century numbered somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million people. The honest answer is nobody knows precisely. The point is, the number was large. What they had built was not simple. Taíno society was organized, stratified, and spiritually elaborate. They had chiefs called caciques who governed territories. They had a ceremonial ball game played on stone-lined courts whose remains still exist. They had agriculture refined enough to sustain large permanent settlements, growing cassava, sweet potato, corn, and tobacco across a landscape managed for generations. Their spiritual world ran deep underground. Caves held a central place in Taíno cosmology, not as shelters, but as sacred thresholds. The Taíno believed humans had emerged from 2 caves, one for their own people, another for everyone else. The boundary between the living world and the underworld of the dead was not metaphorical. It was geographical, a vertical drop into dark water, marked with offerings archaeologists are still pulling from submerged caverns today. Ceramics and organic objects placed deliberately in oxygen-starved pools, preserved there for 600 years. This was the civilization Columbus encountered. He had no framework for it, and that absence of framework would cost the Taíno everything. The Santa Maria ran aground off the coast of present-day Haiti on Christmas Day, 1492. The ship settled onto the sandbar slowly and became irretrievable. Columbus had 2 smaller vessels left and could not bring everyone home. So he didn't. He used the Santa Maria's timber to build a small fort named La Navidad and left 39 men inside it, with instructions to trade, gather intelligence about gold deposits, and wait. Then he sailed back to Spain. Everyone at La Navidad knew he was coming back. That certainty was the last thing many of them had in common with the people they left behind. 11 months later, Columbus returned on his second voyage and found smoldering timber. 39 men dead. No survivors. What happened in the interval has been reconstructed from fragments. The Spanish at La Navidad had not waited peacefully. They made demands. They took things. They treated the surrounding Taíno not as hosts, but as a resource to be extracted. And the Taíno, who had initially received Columbus with genuine hospitality, eventually decided the disruption was intolerable. Columbus read the smoldering fort correctly. He moved down the coast and established Isabella, bringing priests, women, animals, seeds, and the full infrastructure of permanent colonization. The trade relationship was over. What replaced it had a different name and a different logic, and the Taíno would spend the next generation living inside its consequences. The system that replaced trade had a formal name, the encomienda. It was a legal framework, which is to say it was violence with paperwork. Spanish colonizers were granted the right to demand Taíno labor in exchange for, theoretically, Christian instruction and protection. In practice, it meant the mines. It meant the plantations. It meant Taíno men pulled from their villages at the precise moments the agricultural calendar demanded their presence, returned broken or not returned at all. Father Bartolomé de las Casas watched all of it. He had come to the New World as a colonizer, sword in hand, and by his own account participated in the early violence before something shifted in him and he became its most famous opponent. His writings remain the single most detailed account of what the encomienda did to the Taíno rivers of blood, he wrote. Villages emptied. A people methodically worked past the point of recovery. His father and uncle had sailed with Columbus. He knew the system from the inside. But the encomienda was only one mechanism. The other was invisible and moved faster than any soldier. Disease arrived with Columbus and never left. Smallpox, typhus, influenza, pathogens against which the Taíno had no immunity and no medical tradition equipped to respond. Whole communities collapsed before the labor system even reached them. There are accounts of Taíno parents killing their children and then themselves, rather than surrender to a world that had become unrecognizable. That detail does not require exaggeration to be devastating. The Spanish colonial record declared the Taíno extinct, not in a single document, but gradually, across the first decades of the 16th century, the administrative language shifted. References to Taíno labor pools thinned. Census figures collapsed. By mid-century, the official position had hardened into something that suited the colonizers considerably more than it reflected reality. The Taíno were gone. Whatever happened next happened on a clean slate. That framing was not accidental. A people declared extinct cannot make legal claims. They cannot assert rights to land, to labor, to cultural continuity. Extinction is not just a biological description. In the colonial context, it was an administrative tool, a way of closing the file on an inconvenient population without accounting for what had actually happened to them. The Spanish had both the motive and the means to write that ending, and they wrote it. What Las Casas documented was not extinction. It was decimation, assimilation, dispersal, and cultural suppression so thorough that survival became invisible. Taíno people did not vanish. They merged into a colonial population that had no administrative interest in counting them, married into African and Spanish bloodlines, tracked under different categories entirely, and carried their ancestry forward in bodies the official story had already declared empty. The file was closed. The biology kept going. Before I show you the last part, if you've ever looked at your own results and wondered where Taíno ancestry fits into your bloodline, I put it all together in a guide called Where Do You Really Come From? Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. The genetics did not set out to rehabilitate the Taíno. That is not how ancient DNA studies work. Researchers extracted genetic material from skeletal remains across the Caribbean, sequenced what they found, and ran it against the broader landscape of human population genetics. What came back was something the colonial record had spent 5 centuries actively preventing anyone from seeing. The Taíno signal was there, not at the margins, not as a faint trace requiring specialized interpretation. A clear, structured, genetically coherent, ancestral contribution running through modern Caribbean populations, with a consistency the standard historical account had never tried to explain. The study that landed hardest came from a team at the University of Copenhagen that sequenced ancient DNA recovered from a cave on the Bahamian island of Eleuthera. They extracted a complete genome from a skeleton belonging to a woman who lived roughly 500 years before Columbus arrived. When that genome was compared against modern Puerto Rican DNA, the match was not ambiguous. Present-day Puerto Ricans carry a measurable proportion of ancestry tracing directly to pre-contact Taíno populations. The colonial erasure had been linguistic and administrative. It had not been biological. A separate study conducted under the National Science Foundation with the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, pushed the finding into the present. Researchers sampled mitochondrial DNA across Puerto Rico, the genetic material passed unchanged from mother to child through every generation. As many as 61% of Puerto Ricans carry Taíno ancestry through the maternal line. 61% of an island of more than 3 million people. Extended across the Puerto Rican diaspora into cities across the United States, the numbers become difficult to process. The colonial record said extinct. The genome said otherwise. And the genome had no reason to lie. The genetics arrived as confirmation of something many Caribbean people had never stopped believing. In the 2010 United States Census, the number of people in Puerto Rico identifying as Taíno increased by nearly 50% compared to the previous count. That figure does not represent a sudden population discovery. It represents a shift in what people felt permitted to claim. For generations, Taíno identity had been treated as historical curiosity at best and delusion at worst. The genetics changed the social permission structure. When DNA confirmed what families had always passed down quietly, the identification became something you could say out loud. The communities that preserved Taíno cultural knowledge through those generations did so without institutional support. They maintained dances, They maintained music. They maintained sacred practices connecting living people to a tradition the official history had filed under extinct. That preservation happened in households, in the specific stubbornness of people who refused to accept someone else's administrative conclusion about who they were. The language survived too, embedded inside the languages that replaced it. Hurricane is Taíno. Canoe is Taíno. Barbecue is Taíno. Manatee is Taíno. Hammock is Taíno. Words in daily use across multiple modern languages, remnants of a civilization so thoroughly woven into Caribbean life that even the people who declared it extinct kept using its vocabulary without noticing. There is a reason the extinction myth was so durable. It was not simply bad record-keeping. The erasure was structural. A living indigenous population with traceable ancestry and legitimate cultural continuity is a political problem. A vanished one is a historical footnote. The difference between those two categories is not biological. It is entirely a matter of who controls the narrative and what that narrative is designed to protect. The Taíno were the first people in the path of what we now call globalization. Every transformation that followed European contact with the Americas, the movement of people, plants, animals, diseases, and ideas across previously separated worlds began in the Caribbean. It began with the Taíno. They absorbed the first contact, the first colony, the first forced labor system, the first deliberate demographic collapse in the history of the New World. Everything that came after was a variation on what happened to them first. That position in history carries a moral obligation, not guilt, which is useless applied retrospectively, but acknowledgement, the specific, clear-eyed acknowledgement that a civilization was declared dead for reasons that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with power. The DNA age has made that acknowledgement harder to avoid. The Taíno were never a footnote. They were a foundation, and science has now made that foundation visible to anyone willing to look. History said the Taíno were gone. The colonial record closed their file in the first half of the 16th century, and the academic consensus left it closed for 500 years. Extinct was the word. Vanished. A civilization that filled the Caribbean before any European ship crossed the Atlantic, reduced to a parenthesis between Columbus's arrival and the plantation economy that followed. Ancient DNA opened the file back up. What the genetics found was a living biological inheritance carried by millions across Puerto Rico, across the diaspora, across cities where Puerto Rican communities have replanted themselves and carried their ancestry without always knowing what it contained. The Taíno genome did not disappear. It moved forward through every generation the colonial record refused to count, through every household that kept the dances and the words, and the quiet insistence that the official story was incomplete. They left their biology inside the people who came after them. They left their words inside the languages that replaced their own. They left a cultural memory stubborn enough to survive 5 centuries of institutional pressure to forget it. History said vanished. The DNA said otherwise. And the descendants are here, carrying in their bodies the record of a civilization that was never actually erased. It was only waiting for a science precise enough to find it.